Welcome to another IB Environmental Systems and Societies video. Today we're going to cover the standard level content for topic 6.4, stratospheric ozone. In this video, we're going to explore one of Earth's most important protective layers. That's the ozone layer in the stratosphere. We're going to examine how this thin shield protects life from dangerous radiation, how human activities damage it, and what we've done to fix the problem. This topic is actually a great environmental success story because it shows that when the world works together, we can solve major global problems. So let's get into it. Let's start with understanding what the sun sends our way. The sun emits electromagnetic radiation, which is energy traveling in waves. Think of it like a spectrum or a rainbow of different types of energy. At one end, we have low frequency radio waves that have long wavelengths. These carry less energy. At the other end, we have high frequency gamma radiation with very short wavelengths, and these pack a lot of energy. In between, we find microwaves, infrared radiation, visible light, ultraviolet radiation, and X-rays. Each type has a different wavelength and a different frequency, and that matters because it determines how much energy they carry and what effect they have when they hit something. This diagram shows us what the sun actually sends to Earth. About 42% of solar radiation is visible light. Those are the colors that we can see that drive photosynthesis in plants. About 53% is infrared radiation, which we feel is heat and what provides warmth for organisms. But here's what we need to pay attention to. About 5% of that light is ultraviolet or UV radiation. This UV radiation affects biological molecules directly and often in harmful ways. It can cause mutations in DNA, and that might lead to cancer. So even though UV is only a small fraction of what the sun sends towards us, it's the most dangerous part for living things. Here's a key principle you need to understand. Shorter wavelengths have higher frequencies and therefore carry more energy. That's why UV radiation is so dangerous to life. When we look at the electromagnetic spectrum, UV radiation has much shorter wavelengths than visible light or infrared light. Because UV waves are shorter, they vibrate more quickly. That's what we mean by higher frequency. And with that higher frequency comes more energy packed into each wave. This extra energy is enough to break chemical bonds in DNA molecules, and that damages cellular proteins and membranes, and it disrupts the normal functioning of cells. Let's look more closely at the different types of UV radiation. There are three main categories that you need to know about: UVC, UVB, and UVA. UVC has the shortest wavelength, so it transfers the most energy and is extremely dangerous. UVB has medium wavelengths and is still very harmful. UVA has the longest wavelengths among UV types, so it's less dangerous, but it still causes damage over time. The key point here is that high energy radiation like UV can knock electrons out of atoms or molecules. We say that it ionizes them. When this happens to molecules in living cells, it can break apart DNA, it can damage proteins, and it can destroy cell membranes. That's why UV radiation is so dangerous to life. Let me clarify what happens to these different types of UV. UVC is the most dangerous, but fortunately, it never reaches Earth's surface. The atmosphere blocks all of it. UVB is partially blocked, with about 90 to 95% being absorbed by the ozone layer. And the remaining 5 to 10% that gets through is what causes most sunburns and skin cancer. UVA is barely blocked at all. Most of it reaches the surface of the Earth. So while UVA is less dangerous than UVB, long-term exposure still contributes to skin aging, and it can cause some types of cancer. The important takeaway is that shorter wavelengths carry more energy, and that makes UVB and especially UVC the most harmful to organisms. Now, here's where stratospheric ozone becomes crucial. Ozone is a molecule made of 3 oxygen atoms, so that's written as O3. When ozone molecules in the stratosphere absorb UV radiation from the sun, they reduce the amount that reaches the Earth's surface. That's why the ozone layer is so important. It acts like a protective shield, which filters out most of the dangerous UVB and all of that UVC before it can harm living organisms. It's important to understand that not all ozone is good. Stratospheric ozone, that's the ozone layer we're discussing right now, is good because it absorbs harmful UV radiation. It sits about 15 to 35 kilometers above the surface of the Earth in the stratosphere. However, ground level ozone, that's the stuff that we find in the troposphere where we live, that ozone is bad. That ozone contributes to smog and it causes respiratory problems. Both are the same O3 molecule. It's just the location that determines whether ozone helps us or hurts us. In the stratosphere, ozone absorbs all incoming UVC radiation completely, absorbing 90 to 95% of UVB radiation, and it significantly reduces the surface intensity of ultraviolet light. This protection is really important for protecting photochemical damage to DNA and all living things. Let's examine what happens when too much UV radiation reaches organisms. UV radiation reduces photosynthesis in phytoplankton, and it damages DNA by causing mutations and cancer. In humans specifically, it causes sunburn, premature aging of the skin, and cataracts in the eyes. These aren't minor inconveniences. They represent serious threats to both individual health and ecosystem function. Let me explain the impacts on phytoplankton and marine ecosystems more deeply. Phytoplankton are microscopic organisms that float near the surface of the ocean, and they perform photosynthesis. They are the foundation of marine food webs. So when UV radiation damages their cells or their DNA, it reduces their ability to photosynthesize. That means they produce less food and less oxygen. UV can also cause mutations in phytoplankton that which might change their growth rates, and that can affect their reproduction. So if phytoplankton populations decline due to decreased reproduction, that disrupts marine food webs from the very bottom upwards. Everything from small fish to whales depends on healthy phytoplankton populations. So damage from UV can ripple through the entire ocean ecosystem. For humans, UV exposure causes several serious problems. First, it causes DNA mutations, which can lead to increased skin cancer rates. That's especially pronounced in the southern hemisphere where ozone depletion has been more severe. UV radiation produces cataracts in the eyes, which is a clouding of the lens that impairs your vision. It accelerates skin aging, it breaks down collagen, it causes wrinkles and age spots to appear earlier. Even sunburns, which many people think of as minor, actually indicate significant tissue damage at the cellular level. That redness and that pain that you feel after too much sun is your skin responding to UV damage. Now let's understand how ozone concentration naturally stays stable. For a long time, the relative concentration of ozone molecules stayed constant due to something called a steady state equilibrium, which we first encountered back in ESS topic 1. This means that ozone is constantly being formed and destroyed at relatively equal rates, so that the overall amount stays the same. It's like a bathtub with the faucet running and the drain open. If water flows in at the same rate that it drains out, the water level stays the same. The concurrent processes of ozone formation and destruction naturally balanced each other out in the stratosphere over long periods of time. So here's how the natural ozone cycle works, though you don't need to memorize the chemical equations for ESS. UV radiation from the sun strikes oxygen molecules, and that's diatomic oxygen made of two atoms. This breaks them apart into individual oxygen atoms. And when those individual oxygen atoms collide with oxygen molecules, that's one oxygen with the diatomic O2 molecule, they form ozone, O3. When UV radiation strikes the ozone molecules, it breaks them back down, and that happens over and over and over again. The oxygen atoms in the ozone molecules are constantly being interconverted as solar UV breaks down ozone and oxygen atoms react with oxygen molecules to reform ozone. The key point is that ozone splits when it absorbs energy from UVB and UVC radiation. And that absorption is exactly how the ozone layer prevents UVB and UVC from reaching Earth's surface. Let me emphasize this protection mechanism again because it's really important. When ozone molecules absorb ultraviolet radiation, they split apart. This absorption process actually uses up the UV radiation, which prevents it from continuing down to Earth's surface. So ozone doesn't just block UV like a physical barrier. It actively absorbs the ultraviolet energy through chemical reactions. The energy goes into breaking ozone apart rather than reaching organisms below. Then new ozone forms, which is ready to absorb even more ultraviolet. It's a continuous cycle of protection. Unfortunately, human activities have disrupted this natural balance. Ozone depleting substances, or ODSs, destroy ozone molecules beyond the natural breakdown process. These substances augment, meaning they increase or they add to, the natural ozone destruction. The result is that ozone is being destroyed faster than it's naturally reformed, and that's what breaks the steady state equilibrium. The main ozone depleting substances are called halogens. Those are chemicals that contain chlorine and bromine atoms. When CFCs, those are chlorofluorocarbons, that's one important type of an ODS. When CFCs are released at Earth's surface, they eventually rise into the stratosphere. There, ultraviolet radiation breaks them apart, and that releases the chlorine atoms. And here's the frightening part. Every single chlorine atom can destroy about 100,000 ozone molecules before it's finally removed from the atmosphere. The chlorine acts like a catalyst, meaning it speeds up ozone destruction without being used up itself. This means that the rate of ozone destruction becomes greater than the rate of formation, and that shifts the equilibrium towards a net ozone loss. And because CFCs can persist in the atmosphere for between 50 and 100 years, the damage they cause is cumulative and it lasts a long time. Here you can see how ODSs move through the atmosphere. At ground level, humans release substances like CFCs from aerosol cans, from refrigerants, and from other products. These chemicals gradually rise into the stratosphere. Ultraviolet rays then break down the CFC molecules, which releases the chlorine atom. The chlorine then reacts with the ozone, and that breaks the ozone down into oxygen molecules and individual oxygen atoms. With less oxygen available to bond together and form ozone, we end up with significantly less ozone in the stratosphere. And that leaves more ultraviolet radiation free to reach the surface of our planet. When ozone depletion occurs, increasing amounts of UVB radiation reach Earth's surface. That impacts both ecosystems and human health. Remember that without adequate ozone protection, we face all those problems we discussed earlier, but worse. More ultraviolet means more skin cancer, more cataracts, more damage to phytoplankton, more disruption to food webs, and more damage to plant tissues that reduces crop yields. The most dramatic example of ozone depletion is the Antarctic ozone hole. This isn't actually a hole. It's an area where ozone concentration drops pretty severely every spring. Surface UVB levels increase by between 10 and 20% in the area that's affected. So the Antarctic ozone hole allows extreme UV to reach Earth's surface over Antarctica. That's caused phytoplankton productivity to decline somewhere in the range of 6 to 12% in the Southern Ocean. That disrupts food webs and affects animals like penguins that depend on those food webs. This map shows skin cancer death rates per 100,000 people around the world. Notice the especially high rates in Australia and New Zealand, which are shown in deep red. These are southern hemisphere countries that experience higher UV exposure due to ozone depletion. The increased skin cancer rates here provide clear evidence that ozone depletion has real health consequences for human populations. What you're looking at here is called a cataract. That's the clouding of the eye lens that's caused partly by UV exposure. More human cataracts occur with increased UV exposure. This is another health consequence of ozone depletion that affects millions of people worldwide. Now for the good news. In 1987, countries around the world agreed to the Montreal Protocol, an international treaty that regulates the production, trade, and use of chlorofluorocarbons and other ozone-depleting substances. The Montreal Protocol is regarded as the most successful example yet of international cooperation in management and intervention to resolve a significant, important environmental issue. And let's explore why it worked so well. The Montreal Protocol successfully phased out about 98% of ozone-depleting substances. As a result, scientists project that the ozone layer will recover to 1980 levels by sometime between 2050 and 2070. This diagram compares what's happened with the Montreal Protocol versus what would have happened without it. You can see that with the protocol, ozone levels bottomed out around the year 2000 and are now slowly recovering. Without the protocol, ozone would have continued to decline dramatically. Several factors made the Montreal Protocol so successful. First, there was nearly universal participation. 198 different countries signed on. Second, it demonstrated effective global cooperation with developed and developing nations working together. Third, it included technology transfer to developing nations from high-income countries, and that helped the developing nations adopt ozone-safe alternatives without the economic hardship that they couldn't afford. Fourth, the treaty had a flexible structure that allowed updates as new science emerged. And finally, it combined economic incentives with environmental protection, making it practical for industries to comply. This bottom graph shows how emissions of different ODSs have dramatically declined since 1990 as the protocol was implemented. The top graph shows how total stratospheric ozone is projected to return to 1971 levels by around the year 2065. Actions taken in response to the Montreal Protocol have prevented the planetary boundary for stratospheric ozone depletion from being crossed. What's a planetary boundary? Well, that's a threshold that, if exceeded, could cause dangerous and potentially irreversible damages to Earth's environmental systems. We first saw this back in topic 1.3, sustainability. Scientists have determined that crossing the ozone boundary would mean a maximum of 5% global ozone loss. The Montreal Protocol prevented 65% more ozone loss than what was occurred. So, peak global ozone depletion was reached in the late 90s, and the Antarctic ozone hole stabilized after peaking or being its largest in the year 2000. Satellite monitoring confirms that gradually recovering is now occurring. This graph provides concrete evidence of the Montreal Protocol's success. It shows annual global emissions of ozone depleting substances that are measured in thousands of tons. In 1989, when emissions peaked at about 1.6 million tons. Then notice the dramatic decline as the Montreal Protocol was implemented and strengthened. By 2021, total emissions had fallen to just 17,000 tons. That's a decline of over 98%. This scientific data from NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, shows overall decline in ODSs entering the atmosphere. The left graph shows the total chlorine and the right shows the total bromine. Notice that between 93 and 2016, total chlorine from human sources decreased by 10%, even though some specific chemicals like HCFCs actually increased temporarily as replacements for the more harmful CFCs. So total bromine from human sources declined by 11% between 1998 and 2016. What's encouraging is that while natural sources of these chemicals stayed roughly constant, human contributions declined significantly. This demonstrates that our efforts to control ODS emissions are actually working. That's it for the SL content in topic 6.4, stratospheric ozone. The story of ozone depletion and recovery teaches us several important lessons. First, human activities can cause serious global environmental problems. Second, when we take those problems seriously and we work together internationally, we can solve them. Third, scientific monitoring is essential for understanding problems and tracking whether the solutions work. The Montreal Protocol succeeded because it had strong scientific backing, it brought together rich and poor nations, it provided economic support for transitions, and it allowed for updates as we learn more. As you study other environmental challenges like climate change, think about what made the Montreal Protocol successful and whether those same principles might help address some of our other global problems. Until next time, happy learning.